Well, speaking of election and divine sovereignty, I want to go back to the book Providence that was mentioned earlier. Dr. Piper, you published that book last year, going through all of Scripture, drawing out the deep riches of the sweet doctrine of divine providence. Can you just tell us a little bit about what prompted you to write that book, the process of what that was like, and even the impact on you personally as a result of that study?
Where do you start? We had both had very great families growing up, and my father would not have called himself a Calvinist, but he sure prayed like one, sure lived like one, sure preached like one.
Same with mine.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so I cannot doubt that seeds of that were sown. Another example would be my mother-in-law and father-in-law. He's gone and she's 100 years old. When their 16-year-old son died in a car wreck, they did not like my Calvinism. I would barely be able to marry their daughter. They acted just like Calvinists. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord. So I know that there are people who don't use the label, that they don't understand election or predestination or effectual grace or limited atonement. They just don't get those pieces. And inside, they're really lovers of God's absolute sovereignty. And they act like it. So I grew up in that milieu, I think, and the seeds were sown. But I was an explicit freewheeler across town here and at Fuller Seminary, and James Morgan, the systematics prof, was teaching systematics, and he was having us study Romans 9, and I wrote in the blue book at the end of that class for my exam, Romans 9 is like a tiger going around devouring freewheelers like me. I remember standing outside his class, dropping my pen like this. I'd say this, and I said, I dropped it. God didn't drop it, I dropped it. That was my view of free will. Foolproof argument. So my whole world in the fall of '68 was turned upside down with the sovereignty of God, the God-centeredness of God, with Jonathan Edwards and Dan Fuller, and my world changed. And from that day on, I knew this is all I want to talk about. This is what I want to write about. I want to write about the greatness of God, the centrality of God, the glory of God, because it had so revolutionized everything I thought. So that was there. And then as I began to write things, I just kept dreaming, I want to write a big book on sovereignty. I want to write a big book on sovereignty. And now that lasted about 40 years. Keep hoping and putting it off because I knew it would take a long time. It would be very hard, and you procrastinate the hard things in life. And then I bought a paperback book, a paperback version of the NASB Bible, blue paperback. And I said, for several years now, I'm going to read through this Bible, and with a blue highlighter, I'm going to mark every text that looks like God's in control of whatever. And I got a yellow highlighter that said, I'm going to underline in yellow everything that looks like it's a problem for God to be in control. Well, it turned out to be a very blue book. I handed that off about 4 years ago to the guys at Desiring God. I said, take all the blue text and create a Word document for me. Just cut and paste from Logos or however you want to do it, and give me that document. And they did that for me, and it turned out, 60 or so single-space pages of nothing but texts. Now you can do word searches, right? And so I took 2 summers. I forget which summers they were now, but I took a summer to Tennessee, about 14 weeks, and I organized those texts into groups. And you can see that in the book, right? Yep. Sovereignty over death, sovereignty over birth, sovereignty over rulers, sovereignty over disease, sovereignty over... I just grouped these texts into groups and began to write. And the biggest surprise was, not you asked, what did you learn in the process? I intended to write a book on the extent and nature of the sovereignty of God. So how extensive is it? Does it control everything? And the nature of it, how does he do it without messing up our accountability? And lo and behold, within the first 5 or 6 weeks, I realized I can't do it that way. Almost everything I start writing relates to the purpose of sovereignty. You can't talk very long about justifying sovereignty without talking about why is he doing what he's doing. So the first 180 pages are the purpose of sovereignty. And that created the name of the book. I thought it would be a book on sovereignty, and it's a book on providence, because providence is purposeful sovereignty. That's my definition anyway. So sovereignty is God can do anything he wants to do. Sit down and be quiet. He can do anything he wants to do, and that's true. Providence is he knows exactly what he's doing. He has purposes for doing it. They're infinitely wise. They're loving. They're good. And so that's how the book took the shape that it did. And books take on a life of their own. You start writing, you think you're going to write one book, and you write another one, or you write two. And then I took another summer to finish it up. That was pretty much the process.